This is the advanced database creation tutorial. You'll only want to watch this tutorial if you're planning to use an external database, linking to an external database, need to import data as part of your database creation. If you're not going to be doing that, you're creating a brand new database from scratch, we would suggest that you not watch this particular video and instead go back to the database creation wizard tutorial, which will take you through the more standard steps for creating a database that are much faster and much simpler. With that said, we're going to move on to creating a custom badge database using the expert mode. This is the screen as it will look when you first open up your system. And the first thing that you'll need to do if you're going to be creating a database link, doing importing, or you need to use the expert mode for whatever other reason, you need to go down and say create a custom badge database, and then go ahead and say next. In order to be able to do this kind of low-level capability, the first thing that you need to do is log in. So the default is master and ID card. While you can keep that in a no security or a low security situation, we would still encourage you strongly to change that password so that nobody can use it to create badges that shouldn't be able to for your particular location or organization. Once we log in, the first thing that we're going to get is the database creation wizard. Now, if we didn't select use expert data creation screens, then we would proceed down the normal wizard for creation, but we're not going to do that in this situation. We're instead going to say use expert database creation screens and go ahead and say next. And the initial wizard will actually disappear in favor of something that is more advanced. The first thing that we have to do is to create what's called an IDC file. And the IDC file is the database and sort of overall storage mechanism for BadgeBuilder, IDC being for ID card, and it is specifically for BadgeBuilder. So let's call this database tutorial advanced.idc. You can save this wherever you like. It could be on a network. It could be local to your machine. There's also a badge databases folder that's automatically created for you, which is what you're seeing here. And if you are doing something that's completely local to your machine, then that's a good as area as any to use it. If you're happy, go ahead and say save. Now you're going to be going through what's called the badge table creation guide. And basically this is a step-by-step process, but allows you to do things at a much finer level. BadgeBuilder at an underlying level for its database access uses ODBC, which is a Microsoft interface called Open Database Connectivity. It requires that you have a driver for the particular type of database that you're going to be using. So if you're going to be using Oracle, you need an Oracle ODBC driver. If you're going to be using MySQL, you need a MySQL ODBC driver, and so forth. And so what we're going to do here is there are a certain number of ODBC drivers that are provided. The one that we're going to use is actually for Microsoft Access. If you understand ODBC, you'll know that there are several different types of data sources, including file, user, and system. And you can create any one of those types with the system the BadgeBuilder provides. So we're going to stick with the file data source, and the first thing that we're going to do is not use one of the existing ones, but actually create a brand new data source. So if you go ahead and say new, I'm going to select file data source. Now on my particular system, you'll see that I have a number of different drivers for a number of different databases, including MySQL, PostgreSQL, SQL Server, DBase, Access, FoxPro, Paradox, and so forth. In my particular situation, as we said, I'm going to use the Microsoft Access driver. You will need to be somewhat familiar with your particular ODBC driver, and if it needs usernames and passwords, that's something that you'll need to get either from your IT professionals or be able to know yourself, depending upon whether you have that information. So we're going to select the Microsoft Access driver, start at MDB, MDB being the extension for a Microsoft Access database, and we're going to go ahead and say next. Now, the next thing that's going to happen is we're going to be asked to give the data source entry a name, and in this case, it's already been provided to us by BadgeBuilder. Unless you have a reason to change that, and you're welcome to do so, we suggest that you just use the one that's suggested. And we'll go ahead and say next. And finally, it will just provide us a little bit of information about what it's about to create, the type of driver, the name of the field, the name of the data source, I should say, and we go ahead and we say finish. Now, when we hit finish, we're given the ability to make some choices about what we want to do with our database. In this case, we're seeing the Microsoft Access setup. If you select a different driver, you'll see whatever the appropriate screen is for that particular database. In my case, I could go and I could actually select an existing Microsoft Access database if I wanted to do what was called a link or an attaching process, something that BadgeBuilder can do. If you have an existing table in an existing database that you'd like to use, you can actually attach directly to it. This can be particularly useful if you have a situation where you have a personnel database or an access control database and you'd like to be able to create badges using it, but you don't want to have to enter the data twice. You may need to check with your IT professional or the people who service that other system to make certain that it's feasible to do that, but it's a possibility to do that with the software. In this case, though, I'm going to say that I don't actually have a database that I want to attach to, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create my own Access database right here. And what we'll do is we'll call it tutorial, and we'll say OK. And if all goes well, then we'll get a message that says that the database was successfully created, and I'll say OK, and now I have a database entry right here, and I can go ahead and say OK. Going through that process will now return me back to the Badge Table Creation Guide Step 1, and as you'll see, there is now an ID Badge Tutorial Advanced.dsn, which is the data source that we just created for Microsoft Access. So we're going to go ahead and say Next. Because this is a brand new empty database, it doesn't have any tables inside of it, so we won't see any existing tables, but we do have a suggested table which is based upon the name of the IDC file. Again, you can change this to whatever you need it to be. If you need it to be something else, you can change that name here. In fact, we could even just take out the advanced and just call this table tutorial. That's completely valid. We'll go ahead and say Next. The next thing that's going to happen is that the software is going to need a card design to associate with the badge database. And this tutorial does assume that you have already been through the process of creating a badge card design template. And if you haven't done that, then we'd encourage you to look at the card design tutorial first to get a sense of how you create a card design and manage it and manipulate it to get it looking the way that you want. Again, we're assuming that we do have the one here that we want, and as you can see, we have a directory that does contain at least one CTM file. If you have a CTM file that's in a different location, you're more than welcome to browse for it by clicking on Browse. That will give you the opportunity to go and look either on your system, on a thumb drive, network drive, etc., to be able to find the CTM file that you've created. But since the ones that we care about are here, we're going to be okay with that, and we're going to say OK. Now, we have a couple of different options here. First of all, you'll see that the main badge template that's in the system here is a drop-down list, and we can select it. This will become the primary default card design that's part of the database. You can also select additional card designs that you'd like to have be part of the database by selecting from the area over here. You hold down the Control button and click on any one of the ones that you would like to include in the database in addition to the primary. In this case, I think we'll just leave it with the primary and not include any additionals, but you would be able to if you wish to. The next functionality that you'll see down here has to do with storage of information that goes along with a person's record in the database, such as photographs, fingerprints, and signatures. The database can be the storage mechanism for that information if you choose to, or the default location is to save those items as individual files out on the file system, and there being a reference written to each record in the database for that particular for those particular images or fingerprints or signatures. And so you have that option here. A couple of other things that you have an option to do. You can change the proto compression type. We've included several popular types. Uncompressed actually uses a file type of PCX, but PNG and JPEG are by far the most popular. The other thing that you can do here is you can specify a different location where you'd like the pictures to be saved and retrieved from, and that can be helpful if you're interested in saving them on a network drive, for instance, which would not be the default here, but is the information. You can change this to anything else that you like. Additional features that you can also select is to include path and include the path in the photo file field. If you have an application that requires that the data that's being read this other application needs to have the exact location of where a photo is, not a relative path, then putting that checkbox in there will allow will force the badging system to put in the complete path right down to the drive letter for where the photos and the pictures and the signatures are being stored, rather than just storing the actual name itself. It's important, if this is important to you, to make that selection here, because once that's been chosen or not chosen, it's not something that you can change after this screen. The last feature that you can now take advantage of in the software is the ability to actually specify a name of the pictures. Under normal circumstances, when you're using file-based picture names and so forth, the system actually assigns a random alphanumeric 8.3 formatted file name. So it would be something like abcdefg.pcx or xqprstvu.jpg. But for some people's purposes, it would be useful for the information that's in the database to help specify what that field name or that file name is, rather than it being just random. And so if you have a field in the database that has been specified as being numeric and unique, you can actually select that you would like to use that here under Use Data from Field. And in this case, the first one that's available is the data key. And data key is actually a unique indexed field that we create with all databases or all tables that we create with BadgeBuilder, and something that you could use. If you have additional fields that are numeric, unique, and indexed, it could use those as well. And in those situations, you would be able to specify the picture name by some data that you have in your fields, rather than it being random. You now have two options as far as what you can do for the creation of fields. The first one is that you could import data from a CSV file. CSV files are sometimes referred to as flat files or comma-separated files. They are purely text files where each of the fields are defined in the first line, separated by commas, and then followed on each successive line by information about the individuals in the same order that goes along with the fields in the first line. A CSV file is something that you can typically create by exporting data from a database. It's also something that you can save if you have data in Excel. You can select that you'd like to do a file and a save as in Excel, and it will allow you to save it out as a CSV file. And that's what BadgeBuilder is going to be looking for here. Let's explore that very briefly, and then we'll come back to the adding of fields if you were going to be doing it separately from importing a CSV. If we click on Import Data, the first thing that we'll be given the opportunity to do is select a CSV file, which would mean we would have to have a CSV file available. Since we don't, we won't go any further through the process, but you'll see that that's what it's asking for. At that point, it will read in all the information from the CSV file, preview some of the records to make certain that everything looks correct, and use that structure to allow you to actually create the database. When you're done doing that import of the data through the CSV, what will happen here is that in this database field names column, instead of it being blank, it will actually have entries for each of the fields that came from your CSV file. If you've imported from a CSV file at this point, you've made all the selections that you care about over on the left-hand side, then we would encourage you to go ahead and say Next. What we're going to do now, if you haven't done an import, is to go ahead and say Add a Field. So when we click on Add a Field, we're now given the option to create a field with some very detailed information. The system can handle several different types of information, including alphanumeric, which is A through Z, a few different types of symbols, and 0 through 9. Numeric information, which is much more restrictive, 0 through 9, minus sign, and a period to work as the decimal. Or a counter field, which is a system-generated field that starts at a number that you specify, and then also allows you to use a unique number to count up through records that you've created. BadgeBuilder also has some subset fields that you can use under alphanumeric, one of which is the field format. And if you drop that down, you'll see that it has several different types, including general, date and time, and logical. And date, and time are exactly as they say, and logical allows you to actually use a field in a toggling true-false type of situation, so that if somebody marks a field as true, that some text comes out one way, and then if the field is marked as false, some text comes out with another way. So you might have employee or not employee, and depending upon whether that's checked or not checked, the result is that it either says employee or not employee on the card. For our purposes, we're going to create a few fields here. Now, I've created this without a space because in order to have compatibility with lots of different databases, the system doesn't allow us to put in a space. If you'd liked for it to be displayed in a more human pleasing way, then you can enter an alias, which is completely optional, but is what will be actually used in the system for the display, for entering information and so forth. So we'll go ahead and we'll put in a first name and a last name with an alias of last name. And then we'll create a numeric field called employee ID, and we'll call it empid down here. And let's create an expiration date. And we can go ahead and drop this down. Okay, so we've created a number of different types of fields. You can create as many as you need. If you create one that you didn't mean to, that you'd like to change, you can obviously delete it, and by using the delete a field button. If you decide after creating the database structure that you'd actually still like to import data, you still have the opportunity to import from a CSV file. You can cancel the whole proceedings, or if you're ready, you can go ahead and say next. And when you go ahead and say next, you're going to come to the last step in the process. So the system has stored all of the information that you've selected, and now what it's going to do is it's going to be providing you the opportunity to associate the fields that you created or imported from the database, from the CSV file, and be able to put those directly onto the card. A very important feature to be able to do. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to go ahead and click on this first field, which is just numbers right now because it means it has nothing in it. And we're going to get the database field assignments box. The idea here is that it allows you to enter information that's coming from the database or put in fixed information that is just going to appear on every single card. So for our purposes, we're going to say something like, hi, my name is, and then a space, and that will come out on every single card, but then I'm going to go down and I'm going to select first name. And so this information that's in the little double angle brackets here is going to come out differently on every single card because it's coming from the database, and each record will have something different in it. We can now proceed through and select some of the other fields that we've created, such as employee ID for that field, and perhaps the expires date down here. Now, if we'd like it to say expires, we can actually just type in the word expires. And again, this is a field concatenation type of situation. Concatenation meaning that you can take fixed text and then any number of pieces of information from the database and put them together very simply. For instance, if we go back to our first name, last name for a moment, if we look at hi, my name is first name, we actually have the ability to put a space and then drop down and say last name, and now it will pick up both of those fields. Or if you decide you don't want that, you can just backspace it out and the whole field will go away. Down here, we might want to put in the name of the organization, so we will say, we will give it just a bogus name. And this is just fixed text, so it will show up on every single card. One of the other things to mention is these capabilities down here that have to do with being able to bold, italicize, underline, and increase or decrease the size of the font that you're using. The software has a complete suite of capabilities for you to be able to do card design. But one of the things that you may find that you want to do is to underline or italicize or bold or make larger one small piece of an entire line. And that's something that you can't do on the card design side. When you specify a rectangle, it's only bold or not bold, size, this size or that size, underlined or not underlined. But we don't have to worry about that here because what we can do is we can actually specify that at the beginning where we'd like something to be italicized, we can start italicizing and then when we get to the end where we don't want to italicize anymore, we can say end italicizing. It puts in some little characters that are actually going to get interpreted by the system as we want italicizing. So if we go ahead and say OK, you'll see now Acme Industries came out, but the Acme is actually italicized. So using the field assignments to enhance the capability of how your design looks just a little bit more beyond actual physical card design for that particular rectangle. If we're happy with the card design assignments that we have, we can go ahead and say save at this point. You can always go back and click on any of these to change it. And if you're not happy with this after the fact, you can always go and make changes to the assignments or the card design after the database has been completed, the process has been completed. So don't feel like you can't, you have to get it all exactly right here, because it's completely flexible. So we're going to go ahead and say save. The name of the card design is going to be provided to us. It is the design name that came from the CTM file, which we selected earlier, which could have come from anywhere, depending upon whether it was in the local system or whether you browsed for it. You can keep that, or if you'd like, you can completely change the name, and we could call it the Acme Industries employee card. And this now is not going to be a CTM file anymore. It's actually going to be incorporated into the body of the database, the IDC file that we're creating, and will actually become part of it. So we go ahead and say OK, and after a few moments, the card design has been created. There's our information that we've specified. The database has been created, and we're ready to go. If you attach to a database, or particularly if you imported a CSV file, then what will happen as part of this process is the data for that CSV file will all be imported, however many records there are. If there are a lot, you'll actually see a progress bar as it imports all of the data in. And in that case, what you will actually see is real actual data from the import that you did. And so your database, you will save yourself a lot of time, and your database will be right there. Same is true of an attached database. If you've attached to a table that comes from another system, then all of the records that were in the table that you selected should actually be available to you in the database right here for you to be able to see, and so forth. That ends the advanced database creation tutorial for the experts, the people that need advanced functionality. If you would like to look at the simpler one, that one doesn't have the capability for you to import from CSV files or attach to databases, but it does shorten the creation time for a brand new database and take out a lot of the complexity that we've just gone through here.